Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. I've been doing a lot of work recently in the Internet of Things space, probably mostly with larger companies, and it's very exciting because everybody is trying to figure out not only what the new products are going to be, but also what the world is going to look like. So I'm going to give you a bit of a more global perspective than what Mike was talking about, and I think it might help you kind of understand where we all fit into the overall ecosystem and the landscape. So as you can see from how crowded this room is, and there are people in the back standing even, the topic of IoT is a very hot topic, and there is a significant level of interest in the space. And we see that not only here in this room, but also in the broader world, in social and business circles. So let me give you a few examples from across the spectrum. So I'll start on the more casual side with Twitter. And if you look at the recent growth, the current rate of tweeting is more than 4 tweets per minute on all things IoT, and it has grown 6-fold in the last 12 months. If you look at the Google, IoT-related searches have increased threefold since the March of last year. And we see the same similar trends in the business media. So if you look at the number of publications, you can see that we're on track to get to 26,000 this year. When we last looked at these numbers about 6 months ago, they were growing, but they were significantly lower than this. And in fact, in the last 6 months, the rate of growth has almost doubled. So you can see how active everybody is in the space and how much conversation is going on out there in business and social media. Everybody is talking about IoT, but fundamentally, what is it? So when we did our research, we found that the common terms that are used for the Internet of Things, I think, are fairly well understood. People talk about physical objects, they talk about networks, data, connectivity. But what was interesting is that how those terms, how that vocabulary is actually used in defining what Internet of Things is actually varies a lot. We found dozens of definitions of what people call the Internet of Things. And therefore, we had to come up with our own. And when we look at our own definition, when we look at the Internet of Things from our perspective, again, if I step from a micro level to a macro level, there are 3 foundational elements to what makes IoT IoT. One is embedded intelligence. The second is ubiquitous connectivity. And the first one is deep analytical insights. And when you put those things together in disruptive ways that generate business value, now you're talking about IoT. If I look at it at a more granular level, and if I kind of disaggregate this into components, fundamentally we see that IoT will come to all 3 economic spheres. Whether you talk about B2B, B2C, or public sector, IoT will be in all 3. Regardless of the economic sphere, fundamentally what you have is, for the first time in history, you have an ability to take something out of the physical world, run it through the digital and back into the physical. So you have, for the first time, you have a closed-loop system, if you will, that not only gets the information from the physical world, but has the ability to actually affect the physical world in return. And this is for the first time on such a scale across so many applications, with such a big economic impact. In order for you to actually be able to do that, you really need to have a collection of various capabilities. We call them the elements of the value chain here. And fundamentally, if you look, starting with sensors and devices through infrastructure and platforms, applications and services. In order to have a true IoT solution from our perspective, you really need to have a combination of all of those, because that's really what, in the end of the day, delivers the value to the customers. Those solutions that you create using those elements fundamentally operates within and across the industries and within a certain regulatory and policy landscape. In some industries and some applications, the regulations and policies are not important, but in many others, and I assume that in some of the areas that you are working on, those are fundamentally very critical. You put it all together, and fundamentally it will all come down to what value it delivers to the clients and customers, and what impact it actually results in. We can all come up with a very cool hardware, but at the end of the day, it is really whether we can drive the additional transformational value. And that brings us to the question of, when you look at, your individual efforts and when you look at the, efforts of your companies, where in this landscape do you actually fit? How does what you are doing actually align and fit with what others in the ecosystem are doing and other solutions that you end up with actually driving additional value? So if we look at it at the physical level, at the level of devices, Mike talked about it a little bit. So we see the number of connected devices going tenfold between now and 2020, and this is 4 times the rate of growth as compared to traditional devices, those cell phones and things like that. So if you envision the world in 2020, and you look across the entire population on Earth, whether it's Russia, China, Africa, on average we'll have more than 3 connected devices per person, which on the surface doesn't sound very impressive, but if I translate that into Silicon Valley, then we're talking about real numbers, right? For a family of 4, given how connected we are here, you'll have 250 devices. For the people in this room, we collectively will have more than 15,000 connected devices. And for the population of the Silicon Valley, it's more than 200 million. And that's the geographic area with a diameter of less than 30 miles. Right? So now you can think of the density, you can think about interconnectivity, and you can think about the opportunities that such a density of connectivity and intelligence can actually deliver. We looked at it also from the economic perspective, again, at the macro level. And our estimates show that out of the $100 trillion global economy in 2020, 6% of it will be affected in one way or another. That's a big number. Now, those effects will actually be very different in different use cases and different industries. Some of those are clearly just incremental revenues that result from companies selling additional IoT products and services. Some are productivity improvements that when you deploy IoT solutions that you can achieve. There will be a certain amount of money removed from the economy because of the cost reductions. That's on the right side. That's the value accrued to the customer. And then there will be a significant portion that what we call redistribution of revenues, which is fundamentally revenues moving across the companies and the industries. If you look at the last 10 years, the internet revolution, education, advertising, information, a bunch of industries have been fundamentally disrupted with redistribution of revenues on a massive scale. And if you think about the capabilities of IoT and how much pervasive it's going to be, those disruptions will be much more significant. So when we did the estimates, here you have a few numbers. So we did our own modeling. We looked at what others have published on this topic. And what you can see is that the numbers here range from close to $180 billion of the value to the customer to $3.5 trillion of redistribution of revenues. So whatever your estimates are, however you fit into this, at the end of the day, IoT, when fully deployed, will be materially disruptive. There is no question about it. And there will absolutely be winners and losers. So if I look at the additional IoT revenue, so that $344 billion that you had on the left side. So I want to give you a couple of different cuts of it just to give you a flavor of how we think it's going to play out. So the first cut is around the B2B, B2C in the public sector. And what we estimate is about 2/3 of those additional revenues will actually accrue in the enterprise space, with the remaining 1/3 split between the consumer space and the public sector with the ratio about 3-to-1. We also, in the context of this work, we also did a survey of the Silicon Valley executives, and we asked them about kind of their point of view on how quickly or which part of the economy will actually be more advanced in getting the value from IoT. And as you can see, their ranking actually mirrors our estimates of what value is going to be. The second cut I wanted to give you is across the value chain. So basically, we looked at the additional revenues and we looked at what will be driven by new sensors, devices, application services, and so forth. And our current estimates is that about 70% of this additional revenues will actually come from applications and services on the left side of this chart. So the numbers are fairly large when you look at the macro level, and you can all, do the math and translate it to the micro level, and they're still big. But the big question that everybody is asking is really what the timing is going to be, right? Because fundamentally, if it takes forever, this is interesting but academic, right? And our point of view, and many of the experts in the industry agree, that we're actually fairly early in the whole IoT evolution, the whole IoT transition. The vertical axis here is a ratio of value to buzz in the ecosystem. And our take on it is that fundamentally there is a lot more buzz right now than the value delivered. The promise is there, but the value is yet to be delivered, whether you look at B2B or B2C. That said, there is actually a significant amount of investment going on in the space, whether you look at VCs, whether you look at industry players or governments, everybody is pouring money into the space. You look at the VCs, and in the last year, the growth of investment was at close to 50% rate versus 7% for the overall VC investment growth. So those are significant numbers. With those numbers, inevitably will come some progress. So we think that the rate of deployment will accelerate in the next 2 to 4 years, and then it will take about 6 to 8 years for that to really get to where the value is really there. So that's kind of our view of the timeline. In the same survey, we asked the same question. We said, okay, so what do you guys think about when the value is going to be here? And what you see here is, well, there are a few people here who believe that the IoT is just right around the corner, a year or two out. The majority of folks actually settled on the 2020 to 2025 range. I mean, it doesn't mean that we need to wait, but it does mean that when you think about value at scale, right, across industries and use cases, then that's the timeline that we're looking at. Now, there are a few people who believe that the value will never be there. I assume they're probably not in the room today. And the fundamental question is, as you develop your product, as you think about your solutions, as you understand how you fit into the ecosystem, kind of what are your time frames and how do they fit with what we believe the development of the overall ecosystem is going to be? I think it's an important question in order to really time the investments and products. Let me give you one other view very quickly here. So we looked at the various industries. You see the list here. And basically, we ask also, okay, which industries will be the first to adopt, right? And we see 3 groupings here. The first one is manufacturing and retail consumer products. Then you have the next 3 around transportation, healthcare, and financial services. And then the last would be natural resource education. It's probably not the exhaustive list, but I think it gives you a flavor of what at least the general consensus is on where there is more interest, where there is more opportunity, which fundamentally means that targeting your bets and fitting into where the others are working in the ecosystem will be important to get greater leverage. I'll give you a couple of examples, and some of you might even be working in this space, but let's start with the smart clothing. Now, envision that your clothing is laced with sensors that transmit real-time data on your conditions, on your activities, and then couple it with other wearable devices that actually aggregate and analyze and process that information, and then transmit that information to mobile devices and applications. And then those can transmit even further, where you could actually combine this information with information from other users. Now, if you can envision that kind of a world, that kind of a scenario, I think you can also envision quite a number of different, quite personalized services that you can offer to both individual users and the groups based on just this one simple example. And what's interesting is that because of the embedded intelligence, because of the pervasive connectivity, you fundamentally can actually do many more things than just a single solution here. You can actually connect multiple nodes in the system and deliver the value in multiple ways. Smart parking is another example. I'll give you kind of just a quick overview. There are embedded sensors, there are mobile sensors that transmit information. You collect and analyze it, you report it in real time. You can report it to the user, you can report it to other applications and services, and at the end of the day, you can build in the intelligence into the entire ecosystem. And if you imagine one step beyond that with a little bit of thinking and probably with a lot of development, you can easily envision a scenario where this becomes not just a real-time information sharing, but actually a predictive engine that will channel traffic or move people to areas, different parking areas, not based on what's available right now, but what's forecasted to be available. Right? So there is opportunities to really optimize many of the aspects of our daily life just with one fairly straightforward solution. So if I look at the capabilities that are needed, so I talked about sensors and devices and services and so forth. But what we also did is, in order to make it more practical and more tactical, if you will, we also looked at what are the categories of different capabilities that will be needed. So we looked at the current applications. We looked at what's coming down the pipe. And fundamentally, we created this kind of a classification so that we can actually engage in a very specific conversation about, OK, so what do you really need to have the solution? What kind of sensors? What kind of actuators? What kind of communication platform you need? And at that level, right, you can now talk about the trends and what they mean and what the effect is going to be for the whole IoT solution. It covers, from my perspective, this covers about 80 to 90% of the overall IoT landscape as of now. So if I look at the trends, I'll give you just a very quick high-level overview of several. So if I look at sensors and devices, there are really three trends that, from our perspective, matter. One is around cost, one is around functionality, and one is around market. On the cost side, there are portions of that landscape that, the sensors specifically, that are expected to drop in cost 5x between now and 2020, but there will be other areas where the cost will remain actually static. In the end, cost will continue to be a fairly significant factor in decisions for whether to deploy or not deploy IoT solutions. Functionality is moving from stationary to mobile. I think it's fairly obvious, but I think it's moving from stationary to mobile in a much broader sense and in a much broader set of applications beyond those obvious. When we look at the market, specifically at the sensors and devices, the market is extremely fragmented, and from our point of view, will continue to be very, very fragmented, which on one hand is a challenge, but on the other hand is an opportunity for new entrants and for a greater level of innovation. Moving on to infrastructure and platforms, there are two real trends that I think are important. One is that the connectivity will be pervasive, and we're not only talking about what we normally define as connectivity, so it's not just mobile devices and cell phones, but it is a peer-to-peer and distributed networks, and it's an object-to-object connectivity that will be very, very prevalent. And the second one is, if you look at the infrastructure and platforms, many of these are moving to cloud, which also has significant implications to how you put your solutions together. The last one here on the applications, a couple of things. One is what we see in the application landscape, that most of them are very, very targeted. There are specific use cases, there are specific scenarios. They're, in general, fairly narrow in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. And we believe that it will continue to be the case. The big battle that has been going on, whether you look at the connected home, connected car, connected self, is for the user interface. And again, there are a multitude of solutions, as you guys know. And we believe that that fragmentation will persist in the future. We don't believe that there will be a single winner or necessarily a very significant consolidation in the next few years. So what are the challenges to deployment of the IoT, right? Beyond what Mike talked about, you actually need to have good products. But beyond that, what are the key challenges? And we identified a number of them here. Some of them are cost-related. I talked about it earlier. Some of those are lack of standards, lack of agreed on protocols, lack of agreed upon interfaces. Regulatory landscape hasn't caught up with the new capabilities. If you, tracking with the Apple iWatch, Apple Watch release, and the whole question around collecting and sharing and medical information from individuals. It's a very big regulatory issue that's going to play out in the near future. There are significant degrees of complexity. Whether you look at the individual solution or whether you look at the collection of solutions, fundamentally the level of complexity of sensing, communicating, analyzing, transmitting, acting, there is a fairly difficult technical challenges as well as the operational challenges. And at the end of the day, I would argue that the biggest one of all is really this whole question of a real business value delivered by a specific Internet of Things solution. I would argue that there is a lot more technical capabilities to do cool stuff than there are business cases that have been articulated for why that cool stuff actually needs to be bought. Whether we are talking about consumers or whether we are talking about business to business. Many of the clients we work with are really trying to figure out how to deliver true business value and not just an interesting solution to a peripheral problem. So in looking at this, we identified a number of success factors. I mean, those are not prescriptive in nature. They're really more conceptual. I would call them kind of a way of thinking, if you will. And we identify those factors for the overall ecosystem as well as for the individual companies. So I'll share them with you. If you look at the list on the left, what you'll see is that there are a handful of those, and they really deal with the standardization, they really deal with collaboration, right? And they really deal with the costs. So fundamentally, if you look at the ecosystem level, those are the things that will make or break, will affect the speed with which IoT is going to be deployed. When you look at individual companies, there are a handful of these that we believe are critical. Clarity of business value that you're delivering is important. That goes back to what I talked about earlier, which is, technologically we can do a lot more things that, potentially might make sense economically. Flexibility. The space is going to churn and evolve with the speed and across a landscape that we haven't seen before. So ability to roll with the punches, ability to actually figure out how to react to new technological advances or developments of new business models will be essential. And then innovation and collaboration going hand in hand in being able to deliver the products and solutions to the customers. So all of that is, I think, will be important, whether you're a small company or a large company, really being able to operate in that fast-moving and unpredictable landscape, I think, is going to be important.